Section 215 of the Patriot Act is up for renewal come June 1st, a little more than a month away. And we think it's pretty important that you know what that means.
Right, we've had the Patriot Act for 14 years, and are we going to have it for another 5?
That's the question. Not just the Patriot Act, but all that goes along with that. That's today's Talking Point. Stay with us. We'll be back in 60 seconds.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move. So I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
There is a place where young and old make connections, where kids feel like grown-ups, and grown-ups feel like kids. There is a place where beauty arises in contrast, where wonder is universal, and laughter second nature. There is a place where friends find a future, families find each other, and feelings find their home. There is a place.
Yeah, that's you. The whole thing.
All right.
Oh, we're back. Welcome back to Talking Point Live. We're coming to you live from the campus of Dixie State University in St. George, Utah. I'm Eric Young.
And I'm Jennifer Kohler, and we're arguing about what to talk about today.
We are arguing
how fast to talk about and how much to talk about.
So we need to stop arguing and get into the content. We're going to talk about the Patriot Act. We're going to break that down into 3 parts for our show today. The first one, to orient you to the Patriot Act and what that means, and then we're going to talk about Edward Snowden. He's pretty significant in this whole idea of what's been happening as far as the Patriot Act is concerned. And then we'll get into Mitch McConnell and a bill that he introduced last Tuesday on the floor of the United States Senate. And then we'll talk about the idea of metadata and what all that means. What does this mean to you and to me and to Jen and everybody who's online or using a phone or electronically connected on
Yeah,
someone.
and we're going to do all this in 30 minutes or less.
Patriot Act, go.
Okay, so it was instituted 6 weeks after 9/11 as an emergency measure to help fight terrorism.
A temporary emergency measure.
Temporary, and it has to come up every 5 years for renewal. And it has lots of provisions in it, and 215 is one of the sections that we're concerned about. And basically, there's 4 areas we want to talk about as sections or areas that are touched by the Patriot Act. So I'm going to look at my notes so I don't forget one. One is record searches. All right?
And that's what 215 directly deals with.
Yes, 215 does that. And by the way, when you're thinking about the Patriot Act, in your mind, make a distinction between mass surveillance and targeted surveillance. Okay, record searches, that means it expands the government's ability to look at records on your activity as a citizen and information that's held by third parties. So that could be Google, Apple, Verizon, AT&T.
Yeah. Sprint.
So the government has access to information they hold, all right? Secret searches. So now it expands the government's ability to search private property without notice. Does that sound at all scary? It sounds like it violates.
It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that.
Let me have you skip down to since we're just talking about 215 today,
all right,
in the interest of condensing this together,
talk
about the amendment violation that 215 does, and it's right.
Okay, it's right down there in case I space it out. Okay, right. So, well, there's the warrantless searching.
Right.
So basically, the big concern here is that in the past, before the Patriot Act, if the government wanted to search your phone or your personal effects, they had to go to a judge and get a warrant. You had to be the target specifically of an investigation, and they had to prove valid cause. Now, since the Patriot Act, you are just part of a mass surveillance program. Nobody has to get a warrant to search your personal information.
So they've legalized warrantless search.
Yeah, that's definitely a violation of the First Amendment, Fourth Amendment.
Fourth Amendment and First Amendment too, from a free speech standpoint.
That's right, because it inhibits your free speech. Right.
So what does this mean? Probably not a whole lot to you if you've got nothing to hide. And that becomes problematic when the President of the United States goes through and dismisses this as just some kind of a mass accrual of metadata information. Well, enter Edward Snowden. He came to light in June 2013, almost 2 years ago, when he left his post working as a contractor for the NSA, the National Security Administration, and fled after understanding the breadth and scope and depth of what the NSA was actually data mining at the time. And this was done in response to President Obama saying that, well, all that's really being mined is metadata, not direct data, and all that's really happening is from citizens in the United States to people who might be in foreign countries. Snowden knew better. He knew that that wasn't the case, and decided to go public with this information. But he had to very carefully calculate how he would go public in doing so, because he knew he would become probably the first person of interest by the United States of America when it came to this breach of security, because basically what he was doing was violating the Espionage Act. So Snowden left his post in Hawaii and he went to Hong Kong, and he summoned two journalists, Glenn Greenwald, who writes for Slate.com and also writes for The Guardian US. Glenn Greenwald is an attorney as well, just to give you some background with his expertise on constitutional law. And he also got a hold of Laura Poitras. Laura is a filmmaker, and she has a series of films that deal with security issues in the United States when she herself became a person of interest by the NSA earlier in her career. Well, there's a little method in his madness in summoning these two together, because they knew what they were talking about. Greenwald, from a standpoint of understanding the gravity of the infractions that the NSA was guilty of, or what these documents that Snowden was going to show them, what they were indicating. And Poitras, from a standpoint of being able to document this whole process of telling Snowden's story from the time he goes through and releases the documents to Greenwald and another journalist to up to current day. They're still involved in telling Snowden's story. The problem with Snowden's story is it's not new, it's not sexy, we've all forgotten about it in light of everything else that's been going on. So in comes that sneaky little provision after 5 years of having to be renewed, that Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which deals with this metadata that Snowden's been warning us about, is now up for renewal. And that's why we're talking to you here on Talking Point Live and trying to give some scope and depth to the concept of the Patriot Act and Snowden's role involved in that. Now, you know of a great documentary series.
Right.
Do you want to push that?
Yeah, so, you know, what we're trying to do in this short little segment is, in my opinion, impossible. So what you need to do is to be informed and to have context, because the context around this is so important.
So how do they find out?
There's a few things you can do that are relatively painless and actually, I think, fascinating. One of them is watch a production on PBS's Frontline called The United States of Secrets. It's 2 parts, a total of 3 hours, and it gives you the history of the national security agencies, or is it administration? I always
National
forget.
Security Administration.
Yeah, the NSA's surveillance programs and people inside the NSA.
How they came about as a result of the
Yes.
Bush administration.
Yes, how
post
they were
9/11.
altered, how they operated before 9/11, how they were altered by 9/11, and how people inside the agency reacted in a negative way, how it went to Congress, these complaints, way before Snowden was ever in the picture. So there's a history of whistleblowers and people inside the NSA objecting to what they call unconstitutional surveillance of Americans. So really, Snowden is not the first part of this. He's the tail end.
Right.
Of
United
this
States of
objection.
Secrets actually gives us the backstory of Snowden's story, okay,
Right.
up to the point when
Yeah.
he goes through and releases the documents.
Yes.
Then to follow up on that, there's another documentary, a film that won Best Documentary Oscar by Laura Poitras, that talks about Edward Snowden's story from that point on, called Citizen4. Now, it's imperative, in order for us to get a real understanding of what's going on here, for you to have this background information. Both Jen and I have vetted both of these documentaries, and PBS, being a federally subsidized organization as far as this information is concerned, they're biting the hand that feeds them in going through and putting this information out there. And then Laura Poitras, to come along with Citizen4, goes through and puts the icing on the cake in helping us to understand not only Snowden, but his incentive, the reasons why he did what he did. I think you'll find that to be very revealing.
Right.
You can find links to both of these, ironically, on our Facebook page at facebook.com/talkingpointlive. We'll be right back.
Where the sun doesn't hide in the winter, where the greens stay green, and the crimson canyons still glow. There is a place where dimples determine destiny, and a tiny wooden tee holds the outcome in the balance. There is a place where we drive for show, putt for dough, and settle the score with another round. There is a place.
I'm a winner. I'm Dixie.
Welcome back to Talking Point Live, where Eric and I are discussing our concerns about the reauthorization of the Patriot Act. And Eric, you were particularly excited or alarmed by the fact that our Republican Senate,
Unnerved.
Republican majority Senate, right, unnerved, is trying to reauthorize basically Section 215 of the Patriot Act without having any public debate.
It's not a matter of its reauthorization, because that's going to happen. It's built into the law. Every 5 years, this thing's going to come up for a vote. But it's how Representative or Senator Mitch McConnell decided to go through and try to sneak this under the door as far as the Senate and their process is concerned. He introduced the bill late in Tuesday evening session to almost a nearly empty Senate that nobody was really paying a whole lot of attention. But he had to introduce it to go through and get it on the docket. And then he went through and makes an objection to his own bill in doing so. That way, it subjugates the process where the bill does not have to go past the Senate's Judicial Committee and the Senate's Intelligence
Right.
Committee for any kind of review or any kind of debate. It fast tracks the bill to go through and just to be voted upon and then automatically renewed as far as 215 is concerned.
So this is the fast track process. And you could look at it, if you were a little skeptical, as the sneak it past the public process.
I don't know that it requires a whole lot of skepticism to come to that
All right.
kind of conclusion
All
here.
right.
And I think it's despicable what McConnell's trying to do.
Okay.
Because what 215 does is, if you haven't figured it out by now, is it opens us as the United States citizens up to unprecedented invasion when it comes to the privacy of the data that we're putting out there.
You know, in this book I've been reading by Bruce Schneier, it talks about, it's called Data and Goliath. There's a whole industry, an economic industry coming up around crunching mass, large, big data. So there's money to be made by collecting data and then sending it out to be analyzed.
Not just a little bit of
Yeah,
money,
yeah.
we're talking about enormous money in the billions
Yeah.
as far as any type of a gross revenue for a company is concerned, especially for like Google.
Right.
I've forgotten the last evaluation. Apple, who provides the devices to go through and crunch big data on.
Right.
Just their last quarter alone in the release of the iPhone 6 had the largest gross profit of any company ever in the history of our economics in the United States at $17 billion, which equated to, I'm trying to remember the number, it was over $14,000 a minute based on the iPhone 6 sales that was going on at the time. And that's just for a quarter, that's
Right.
not for a whole year.
So would you think it would be fair to say that maybe making money is driving the effort to take away our privacy?
Money, certainly power, some level of political power here. Certainly, most patriots would go through and argue that this is an issue of privacy and an issue of security. And as you and I study this, we're
Yeah.
coming to understand that the two cannot exist together, it seems. And most Americans are willing to give up some level of privacy in order to have some level of security against some type of external threat that's coming into the United
But
States.
how much privacy does a person want to give
How
up?
much do we end up giving up?
Yeah, that's the question. And see, we're not saying we know the answer to that, but what we're saying is we all as American citizens need to be informed on this so that we can have valid and thought out positions on it, and then we can elect people to represent us in the government whose values reflect our own values, you know, and
Well,
so
It's the values argument that makes me wonder a little bit, because there's some hypocrisy in Mitch McConnell going through and automatically giving a wash on this idea of its approval, of just making it be approved, take a vote, let's get it done and move on a bill that goes through and asserts federal government overreach, where on the other hand, if we want as many citizens as possible to have some level of health care or to level the playing field when it comes to health care, they go through and call that some type of government overreach. It doesn't make sense.
You're saying there's a
standpoint.
contradiction. then.
Absolutely.
So sometimes they're for more government involvement in our lives as surveillance, and sometimes for less government involvement in our life, as in healthcare.
When it comes to social programs.
Right. So they're trying to have it both ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
All
the
right.
thing that doesn't sit well,
Right.
and shouldn't sit well with most of us as we go through and do an examination. Because what's happening on Capitol Hill is a polarization between you and me, between the citizens, the constituents of this country, to the point to where we think we're enemies because we don't happen to see the same way on a given issue. When the actual issues, the values of those issues are obscured by the likes of Mitch McConnell. And I'm sure there's a couple Democrats out there doing the same thing. This is not exclusive to the Republican type of thinking. But I think it's our job here to go through and call that out. So we're going to talk about what it means, this whole concept of metadata and the government's encroachment on that as we examine 215 a little bit closer as we wrap up Talking Point Live when we come back in 60 seconds.
Oh, look, a redhead.
Staring contest.
You still got it.
I know.
Come alive with the forest.
The dad was cute.
You were looking right at us.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
Welcome back to Talking Point Live, coming to you live from the campus of Dixie State University in St. George, Utah. I'm Eric Young with my co-host Jen Kohler. We're talking about the Patriot Act renewal. It's coming up the 1st of June. In the segment that we just left, we talked about Mitch McConnell's introduction of this bill. We have a little footage about that from C-SPAN that shows exactly what went on. Let's go ahead and roll that.
They're in for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
I understand there's a bill at the desk, and I ask for its first reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
S. 1035, a bill to extend authority relating to roving surveillance and so forth and for other purposes.
And I ask for a second reading, and in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I object to my own request.
The objection having been heard, the
Now,
bill
Mr.
will be read for the second time on the next legislative day.
Now, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 9:30 a.m. Wednesday, April 22nd. Following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired. The journal of proceedings be approved to date.
As it were.
Do you
So-
just have the impression you're watching some theater?
Well, this is no. I have the impression I'm watching some sneakiness going on here with this.
But yes.
I find this disconcerting, especially the wording of the bill. And you can look it up. It's less than a page long if you condense it all down into its form. There's maybe 2 different sentences that talks about this idea of roving surveillance, and then it gets into some very vague comments after
Is
that.
roving surveillance a nice way of saying mass surveillance?
It's
without warrants?
It's a
Warrantless surveillance?
yeah. So I guess you could say it that way.
Yeah, I just
Put it
hate
out
it when people put nice names on bad things.
So what does that mean when it comes to data?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm a little concerned about is you notice that we were looking at a Republican Senate Majority Leader. And I'm worried that a lot of people that are affiliate or identify with the Republican Party will say, well, they're Republicans, they're on my side, that's my team, I don't have to worry. because I'm a Republican and they're a Republican.
Yeah, you're getting into groupthink.
Yeah, okay, groupthink. Well, here's the thing about that. That doesn't absolve us of the responsibility of being informed. And, you know, we're taught, a lot of us in our culture, that if we're not an informed citizen, then we are likely to lose the freedoms that we have, and that our Constitution, you know, to quote an old phrase, might be hanging by a thread at some point. Well, maybe this is a thread. This freedom of privacy intersecting with security needs. Like I said earlier, there's this book by Bruce Schneier, and he's a expert on surveillance and security, digital security.
Before you go there, because I wanted to end on that, because I think it's pretty important. I want to get into the idea of what roving surveillance means and an interpretation of that. So the Patriot Act goes through and makes available data.
Right.
What the president calls metadata. And the metadata that you and I generate as far as our devices are concerned have to do with the telephone numbers that we're using, the telephone numbers that we're calling, the time of day when we make those calls, maybe even the routing of those calls. If I'm making it from a cell phone, it's coming up through a cell tower. And they can go through and triangulate based on that data where I am in either sending or receiving those phone calls. So while that seems pretty innocuous, that it's just numbers, we can start to paste together or triangulate what that data begins to mean. Now, the roving part of that doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that we're all on mobile devices. It has to do with the fact that initially this act dealt with what's called telephony, the kind of data that's generated by telephone signals. But with the introduction of VoIP, which is Voice Online Internet Protocol, the way that many people are now making phone calls, we've moved away from traditional phone technology and into internet technology to go through and carry those same types of signals. Well, that opens the door then for the NSA to start taking a look at, to keep on taking a look at what's happening as far as our online activity is concerned. And again, if we're still talking in terms of metadata, then there we're talking about maybe our IP address, which is a special number given to your computer. So every time you log on to the internet, they know who you are based on your IP address. But what if you go through and you put in a search term into your Google browser? Or what if you decide to go through and friend somebody on Facebook? All this becomes the same kind of metadata. So now they know more than just where this data is coming from as far as your device, your mobile device, or your iPad, or your laptop, or your PC. But now, based on the kind of data that you're putting in search criteria, even though it's not looking at the actual data that comes up as a result of the search, this data is embedded in the metadata that we're using to go through in search terms. They know what we're looking for. They know who we're talking about. Man, I sound like a real conspirator here. That's not the right word, but it sounds crazy. The problem with this is that it is crazy. The government has this kind of overreach within our personal lives. So anybody who tries to go through and discount this and say, well, it's just a number of, it's just numbers, it's just times of day. No, it's more than that. It's a complete encroachment of anything that we might feel we hold private, a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
You know, what I'm asking too is for people not to make it political. Don't say if one political party's in favor or against, that's going to skew your perception of it.
Let me speak to that as well.
Okay.
It should be noted that there is a bipartisan approach to go through and defeat the renewal of this bill. Okay, and it's a majority on both sides. It's both Republicans and Democrats who come together in a bipartisan effort to go through and defeat this and not renew the Patriot Act. But it's a Senate Majority House Leader, Mitch McConnell, a Republican, who comes back and says, nah, we're going to try to sneak this in and get it voted on anyway.
You know, I think it behooves us, doesn't it, as Utahns, to know where our two senators, Hatch
I can
and
tell you
Lee
where
stand
Hatch
on-
and Lee and
Okay.
Chaffetz stand
Okay.
on this. They are
Okay.
in full support of its renewal.
Okay. No questions asked.
No questions asked.
No qualms, no
Nope,
modifications,
just
no
move
nothing.
right along, because that's what's been serving the country so far. So
Yeah.
we'll continue to do that, all under the auspices of providing some level of security and sanctuary for the United States of America, all at the cost of our feeling secure with our own devices, with our own information, with what's going on. So I interrupted
All right.
you. Go
That's
on
all
back
right.
to that.
Okay, so we already referenced the United States of Secrets and Citizen4 as two documentaries that do a lot as far as providing context and history around it. This book that I'm reading right now, Data and Goliath, The Hidden Battles to Capture Your Data and Control Your World. It says, during the Cold War, communist East Germany was perhaps the most spied upon nation on earth. with one secret police informant for every 66 citizens. And now, though, in the 21st century America, we have more informants, and they're digital informants. So our phones and our computers incessantly rat us out, broadcast our interests, our friendships, and locations to government and corporations, and alike. So what we're asking you to do is wake up, take the politics out of it, get yourself informed, have an opinion that's based on what you really believe reflects your values for privacy and security, and then let your elected officials know what you want them to, how you want them to vote in your behalf.
There's no change in this digital surveillance. If you take a look at what's happening in Bluffdale, Utah, we have an image of that. The NSA's state-of-the-art facility there that's going through and maintaining their momentum as far as digital surveillance is concerned. One of the last meetings that Glenn Greenwald had with Edward Snowden in Russia, Greenwald revealed to him that as of that time, which is about 6 months ago, that there were 1.2 million Americans who are current persons of interest of the United States through the NSA, the FBI, or the CIA. 1.2 million. You bring up the number here as far as East Germany is concerned and the surveillance that's going on there. This is something that we cannot take lightly by any stretch of the imagination when it comes to government overreach and what's happening with our own rights here as citizens.
And don't forget, it's not just the government that's into your business.
It's corporations as well.
It's corporations, that's right. Not only are they doing it to monetize your information without you knowing it a lot of the time and sell it off and get rich on it, but also they are cooperating with the government. So the government builds in back doors, and it forces, and you'll notice this in the United States of Secrets, it forces corporations to hand over your data. And when they get these national security letters from the FBI insisting that the corporation hand over the information, the recipient of the letter, the corporate CEOs, the people that receive them, are told that under penalty of law they are not allowed to share this letter or this demand with anybody. It's a secret letter.
Google has been served 14 times with this letter. So has Facebook, and these are two entities that are gathering this information. Ironically, I'm going to sit here and say, go to our Facebook page on facebook.com/TalkingPointLive, where you can find the links to the two documentaries that we've been talking about. But you also find there a YouTube video that I posted that goes back to President Obama's latest press conference and talking about the actions that the executive branch took on as far as the NSA is concerned. The idea was that that the president introduced to us was that we needed to return back maybe away from the government gathering this kind of data and let private business go through and gather and hold that data in the event that it should ever need to be used for investigations otherwise. And these private companies we're talking about are Verizon, they are AT&T, and Sprint, as well as the data collected online by Google and by Facebook. Now, if you understand how those algorithms work, that's a lot of information that's being stowed away to be used against anybody in a court of law later on, not under any volition other than the state's issue that they might have with you,
right,
based on who you're friends with, based on who you receive a phone call. How many degrees of separation do we have between ourselves and somebody who might be considered to be a person of interest, let alone an enemy of the state?
Well, there is one bright spot we can celebrate, that today the Comcast-Time Warner merger fell through. And I was just sick in my heart the last few years thinking it was inevitable that this huge monopoly, this giant supersized monopoly, was going to be formed against my will. And finally it got enough resistance from our government, thank heavens, that Time Warner and Comcast are not merging. That deal's off. Celebrate.
Yeah, we ought to celebrate. Let's go out and have some lunch or something. Take a look at the medias that we've posted. You should know that I've donated to the Obama campaign in full transparency, and it hurts me to go through and watch the cowardness that we're seeing within this press conference as he addresses the issue as far as the Homeland Security and the Patriot Act is concerned with this. So there's some mixed feelings with that, but the truth is more important than maybe our own affiliations. Thank you for joining us on Talking Point Live. We'll be back next week with our last show for the season. Be sure to join us. We'll see you then.
Bye.